Hi guys, this video will show you how to use Microsoft Excel to complete your first Microsoft Excel lab assignment. So, just in general, make sure that you actually do use Excel to complete this assignment, and this video will walk you through everything you need to do in Excel for this assignment. Type your answers into the space provided. So make sure that when you see questions, you type in your answers or you paste things from Excel when the question asks you to do that. And basically just make sure that you save your document with your answers put into it and all of your work in Excel. You're going to be submitting both documents. You can find the place for submission, the same place that you found this assignment in either the modules or the assignments tab. So this data is just looking at a hypothetical study of our awesome dean, Dr. Shinta. Let's say that he was testing a new time management workshop, and before recommending it to all students, he collected data on GPA from students in the fall, then gave them the time management workshop, and then looked at their GPA in the spring to see if GPAs increased in the spring. And the conclusion that he might make from this is that if the GPAs are higher in the spring, that time management workshop actually worked. There's several flaws with this study design, and as we progress through the semester, we will talk about different ways to make this design better and different hypothesis tests that could be done with this data, but we aren't quite there yet. For now, we're just going to work with this data at face value, knowing that maybe there's some other things that happened between fall and spring that resulted in this GPA being better. Okay, so you're going to be asked a series of questions, and you're going to need to use data in Excel to answer them. So I'm just going to left click. So if you go up here to the top left corner of all this data, you'll see the little four-cornered arrow here in the gray box. Left click that. It'll automatically highlight all your data. Hit Control C, hold down Control and then hit C at the same time to copy. Then go into an Excel workbook. Go to the top left cell in your data set and hit Control V to paste. If you get an error box like that, just keep hitting OK until the magic happens. Now we've got our data in Microsoft Excel. We're ready to work with it. The first one, create a frequency distribution table in Excel for spring GPA. Now, in Excel, you want to make sure that you start with the low values at the top and work your way down to the high values at the bottom. And that's really just to make sure that when you create your histogram for the next part, that the axis along the x-axis will go from low to high, left to right. So although in practice in class we were starting with the high value and working our way down to the low value, we're not going to be doing that in the frequency distribution table in Excel. So let's go ahead and create that. Now, there's several different ways. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. The first way is probably a little bit more complicated, so I would recommend that you use the second method. There's no great method in Excel, though. Both of them are somewhat complicated. So the first thing, we're only looking at spring GPA. That's the variable I'm focused on, so just that second round of data collection for GPA. One strategy to do this would be to find the minimum, I'm just going to say min, and the maximum first. Because remember, your frequency distribution table, the X column, or in this case, the spring GPA column, is going to have all of the values in your data set listed from highest to lowest. Then we're going to have another column called the frequency column, or in this case, the number of students, that just says how many times each one of these specific GPAs pops up in our data. So to find the minimum, you can hit equals MIN, double click that MIN, and then select all of your data. Just left click and drag. Hit enter, and our lowest GPA for spring is a 2.5. To find the max, equals MAX, double click the max, and then just highlight all of the data that you would like to find the maximum for. So we know that our data ranges from 2.5 to 4. So now we could go ahead and create our frequency distribution table sort of manually. Now, one thing I want to point out, for some reason, Excel is kind of finicky. So when you create this, make sure that you have a space above everything so that when you go to create the table, it actually, or the graph, it actually works. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to put spring GPA and then number of students. Okay, so I remember, according to the directions, we're going to start with the lowest, go to the highest from top to bottom in our table. The lowest value, we just found that out, it's a 2.5, and we want to go all the way to 4. Now, instead of doing 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, all the way down, there's kind of a shortcut. So you start the general pattern, 2.6, 2.7, and then you can go into Excel and have it count by the pattern that you started, by point ones. So I'm just going to highlight here, and I'm going to say, I think that we would get to 4 roughly around here. Go over to Fill, make sure the Home tab is selected. Go to Fill, go down to Series, and it should automatically know what you're doing. Make sure columns, and then the step value is 0.1, just saying that we're increasing each subsequent number by 0.1 points. Hit OK. That was close. We only want to get to 4, so I'm going to get rid of these guys. Delete. Now we can have Excel count how many times each one of these values appears in this data set. Remember, we are only looking at spring GPA. So we can do equals count. You want to go to count if. Counts the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition. Double click count if. Range just means all the data. So highlight all the data. Comma, space. The criteria is 2.5. Hit enter. There's one 2.5 in our data set. Equals count if. Double click it. The range is the same. We're still looking at spring GPA. Comma, space. Now our criteria is a 2.6. And you can just keep on going down. Highlighting. Comma, space. Now we want to count 2.7. So that is one way that you can go through and create the frequency distribution table. And just to show you, let's go on this end. Equals count, double click count if, highlight all the data, comma space, 4. Hey, there's 8 4s, just to show you it's not always going to be 1. That's one way that you can do it for all of these. And that's perfectly fine. But if you don't feel like typing count if this many times, there is a shortcut that you can use. I am going to go ahead and copy, so control copy, and then paste this data, control V, into a new sheet to work with to show you the other method for getting a frequency distribution table in Excel. You can use pivot tables. It's a really neat tool that helps you summarize data. So you can click on the Insert tab, select Pivot Table. So I'm going to go ahead and select my data, including the label for the data, and select New Worksheet, which just means it'll show up in a new tab down here. Click OK. And just to keep everything straight, I'm just going to right-click and rename this pivot. And then here, well, this was nothing. This, I'm just going to right-click and rename this data, just to keep things straight. So let's go back to pivot. To have pivot tables create a frequency distribution table for you automatically, mostly, I'll show you kind of the problem with this method. Click, drag to row labels, click, drag to values. Make sure that right now it's summing, so it's adding up all of the 3.9s, adding up all the 4s. Remember there was 8 4s, 8 times 4 is 32. That's not really what we're looking for. You can go over here, click on this arrow, select Value Field Settings, and say we want to count how many of each of these appear, not the sum. Click OK, and now we've got the count for each one of these variables in our data set. Now, this sort of creates a problem. If you were just doing this for calculation purposes, that would be fine. But a problem with this is that eventually we are going to take this frequency distribution table and we're going to turn it into a graph. And remember, it's important that you include the full range of values from lowest to highest, including those that have a frequency of 0. Well, pivot tables does not allow for that. If you see here, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, it skips 2.9 and goes straight to 3 because there are no 2.9s in our data set. So we can use this as a shortcut to get the counts, and then we can manually go in and add the full range of values and then just put zeros where zeros should go. So to do that, left click, copy all this data, Control C, go to a new tab down here, and I'm going to rename this tab Pivot Edit. Go ahead and left click in cell A2, hit Control V. Now be careful. If you leave it just as it is, just paste it as it is, it's still doing the pivot table function and it won't let you edit these numbers. So make sure that you go down here under Paste Options and just select Values. Now I'm just going to go through and delete this stuff right here for now. And I am going to add in my values that are missing and then say that there's a 0 frequency here. So yeah, let's say spring GPA and then number of students. I'm going to go right in between A and B where the double-sided arrow appears and double click and it automatically sizes to fit the contents of all of the cells in this column. Same thing between B and C, and now we've got everything fitting really nicely. I also like to center my data, so I'm going to highlight all this and then select this right here just to keep it centered. All right, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8. We need our 2.9. So click over here, highlight all this, right click, insert, and it inserted a new row where we can put 2.9, and there's 0 of those. We know there's 0 of those because it wasn't included in our pivot table. 2.9, 3, we jumped to 3.2, right click, insert, 3.1, none of those. 3.1, 3.2, we skip 3.3, insert, 3.3, 0 of those. 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, skip 3.6, insert, 3.6, 0 of those. 3.7, skipped 3.8, right click, that's how I'm getting this little option, insert, 3.8, and 0. Now we have our beautiful frequency distribution table. I'm going to highlight, hit Control C, and then go into the Excel assignment where it says paste the frequency distribution table for spring GPA below. And you can hit Control V to paste it if you'd like. But if you want to try to start moving things and sizing it, it may become problematic. If you want to make it larger. That seems like it's doing okay. So if you have problems with the formatting, it's looking okay now, but you can actually go to Paste, Paste Special, and I usually select the Enhanced Meta file. Makes it a little bit easier to work with. So now you can shrink it up if you'd like. Okay, so that would be your answer for number 1. If you prefer the first strategy that I showed you, where you just do count ifs all the way down after finding your min and max and representing the full range of values, that's fine as well. You will have the same table. Okay, next one. Create a histogram for spring GPA and paste below. I am going to work with the full frequency distribution table that I created using the pasted pivot table that was edited. Now, for some reason, Microsoft Excel acts very strange if you try to create a frequency distribution graph if you don't do all of these things specifically the way that you should. All right, so we need to delete these two column labels. Now select those empty column labels and all of your data. Go to the Insert tab, select Column, go with the clustered column, and we've got a rough picture of the data, but we're going to do some edits so that it matches the best formatting. Because first of all, we're looking at GPAs. That is a ratio variable. So we want to make sure that we have a histogram here. Also, there's no labels. We don't know what's on this x-axis and y-axis, so we need to add those as well. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this little square. It's a key that we don't need. Just highlight that and delete it. Then I'm going to go up to make sure the Design tab is selected. If you exit the table by clicking outside of it, those tabs will disappear. To get them to come back, just click on the table, or on the graph, sorry. Go to Design, and we are going to go with Layout 8, the one that you can clearly see all the bars are touching, and select that. Now you can highlight the axis and type in what each axis represents. Well, the axis along the x-axis represents spring GPA. So highlight it, spring GPA, and your y-axis is number of students. Now you have your beautiful frequency distribution histogram. Right-click, copy, and then Control-V to paste. And there you go. Number 2 is done. Now, central tendency and variability. I'm going to go ahead and start these on a new page by hitting Control and Enter to insert a page break. Use Excel to find the mean and standard deviation for the sample of fall GPA and spring GPAs, and then I'm going to show you how to use those to create an APA-style table. Now, sample is underlined because remember, the standard deviation calculation differs for a sample versus a population. So you'll have to tell Excel that we want the sample standard deviation. I'll show you how to find that. Let's go back to the raw data here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this incomplete table here. Okay, just to stay organized, I'm going to write mean, so I know what I'm finding, and SD for standard deviation. And the problem asks you for the mean and standard deviation for both fall and spring GPA, so that is what I'm going to find. So the mean, you can use equals, start to type in average. You'll see it pop up. Double-click average, select the full range of data, hit enter. Do the same thing for spring. Equals, start to type average, double-click the word average, select all of your data, and hit enter. Then for the standard deviation, equals, STD, you want to find STDEV.S. Estimates the standard deviation based on the sample. Remember, we're working with a sample. Double-click STDEV.S. Highlight all of your data for fall. Hit enter. Then do the same thing for spring. ST, standard deviation for the sample. Highlight all of my data. Hit enter. You now have the mean and the standard deviation for both of these groups. So you may want to write down these values, or you may want to, if you have a big enough monitor, put this on half of the screen and the Word document on the other half of the screen so you can find your numbers to insert into your table. Now, if you look at this, it says round to the 10,000th place, so 4 decimals out. I can have Excel do that for me by highlighting the values, right-clicking, go to Format Cells, go to Number, and tell it 4 decimal places. Then you don't have to worry about rounding. It's already done for you. And I'm just going to copy and paste these, just highlight them all, hit Control C, and just put them into my lab assignment so I can use them as a reference. Remembering this is fall, this is spring. This is not APA style. You need to create a table in APA style, and right now I'm going to walk you through everything that you need to do. This will help you learn how to create tables that look the way that you want them, and will teach you about APA style and displaying data. So we are going to insert a table with, let me think, 4 rows, and 5 columns is where we'll start. So go to Insert Table, 4 and 5. 5 by 4 should get us into the place we want to be. Go ahead and start by going to the second row on the far left and type in variable. Below that, type in GPA. We're going to have the mean and the standard deviation for fall, the mean and the standard deviation for spring, which is what will be up here eventually. Let's go ahead and type in the mean for fall, 3.1167, the standard deviation for fall, 0.5919, the mean for spring, 3.4367, and the standard deviation for spring, 0.4709. Now, let's go ahead and highlight all of this data. Go to Layout and shrink the width just a little bit, just so the data just fits in there. Another thing that you can do is you can click Auto Fit and select Auto Fit Contents, and it'll automatically do that for you. I just realized that I actually don't need this, so I'm going to wait until, go to the left side, wait till the little white arrow appears, click on it, or you can just highlight it all manually, hit backspace, and then OK. Okay, so now we can actually start to do some of this formatting here. And I actually am going to need another row up here, so just click up here, make sure Layout is selected, and Insert above. So I'm going to merge and center these two cells so that we have fall listed here and spring listed here. So highlight these two cells, go up, make sure Layout is selected, select Merge, and simply type fall. Copy that, hit Control U to underline fall. Now let's do the same thing over here for spring. Highlight these two cells, make sure Layout is selected, select Merge Cells, Spring, and let's go ahead and underline. Control U, Spring. You can also underline by selecting U right here. Now let's center all of these. Go to Layout, highlight all of the numbers, mean, standard deviation, and fall and spring, and hit that to center those. Also, make sure that M and SD are italicized. Highlight those, hit Control I to italicize them, or click on this little I once those are highlighted. Well, now we need to make this look a little bit nicer, and we need to add a label for our table. Let's do the label first. Highlight all of this, all of the cells in the top row, go to Layout, Merge Cells. Type in Table 1, then a space. Go ahead and hit Control I to italicize. See how the cursor became slanted? That means you're getting ready to write in italics. And let's call this descriptive statistics for GPA. Okay, now we're ready to play with the borders to make it APA style. So let's start off by selecting the whole entire table, four-sided arrow, left click on that, click on the Design tab, go over here to where you see borders, click that arrow, and let's just get rid of all of them so we can make it exactly as we want it. Next step, you want to select both of those rows, the fall spring row and then the variables. Go to the borders again, click the little arrow, give it a bottom border, and give it a top border. Let's also go to layout, and let's go ahead and shrink the height. Oh, it won't let us. No spacing? Hey, let's go ahead and do no spacing for the whole table. Let's center these again with layout. And there we go. Now, go to where GPA is, select design, and let's do a bottom border there. Then after table 1, hit enter to create a space, and you have a very beautiful table in APA style. Perfect APA style right there. Very happy situation. This is exactly how you would report this data if you were doing a journal article and reporting your data. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because I've already used the numbers that I need. So hopefully that not only helped you create this table for this assignment, but also gave you a good idea of how to use the tables tool in Microsoft Word and how to make an APA style table showing the mean and standard deviation. For number 4, go ahead and use the values that you just created to answer this question. And for number 5. Now I want to show you how to create z-scores in Excel using the mean and standard deviation that we just created. Let's go back to our data. And I'm just going to create a column here that says Z fall and Z spring, just to stay organized and remember what it is I'm calculating. And it says, what is the z-score for fall GPA and spring GPA for the first student in the sample? So the person that had a 3.5 in the fall and a 3.7 in the spring. This person right here. So to get the z-score, you hit the equal sign, and by hitting the equal sign, you're basically just telling Excel that you're getting ready to request a formula or a value. Start to type in standardize. I typed in ST and it popped up right there. Returns a normalized value from a distribution characterized by a mean and standard deviation. This is just saying it's a z-score. Remember, z-scores are just standardized values in a distribution with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Double-click Standardize. Select the x value, z, looking at fall, this value right here, that 3.5, comma, space, the mean that we found for fall GPA, right here, comma, space, the standard deviation that we found for fall GPA, and enter. Z-score for spring equals ST, standardized pops up, double-click it. Now the x value is this 3.7 for that same person in the spring, comma, space, the mean for spring GPA, select that, comma, space, the standard deviation for spring GPA. Select that and hit enter. Now you have the z-score for this person in the fall and this person in the spring. And you want to put those answers right there. Then 7 asks you to use the frequency distribution table that we created. So this table right here, and I'm going to go ahead and relabel it. All right, so this frequency distribution table that we created and that you also pasted into your assignment, to answer the proportion of students in the sample with a GPA greater than 3.7 for spring semester. So what you can do is you can look at, I'll just look at the one in here, 3.7. So greater than 3.7, greater than 3.7. Well, there is, let's see, none here. There's 9 students who had a GPA greater than 3.7 in the spring semester. So to figure out the proportion of students with a GPA greater than 3.7, you would just take 9 divided by the total number of students, which is 30, and that will give you that proportion. Then, in Part 8, I want you to use the unit normal table that you learned about in Chapter 6 and the z-score for the GPA of 3.7 in the spring semester to then find the proportion of students with a GPA greater than 3.7. So it may be useful for you to draw the distribution and just roughly see if you'd be looking for a tail or a body when you locate the z-score and then find the proportion in that table. And just remember the z-score that you found for the GPA of 3.7 in the spring was 0.559. You'll locate that in the unit normal table, and then you'll look for the proportion in the body or the tail, depending on where you'd be looking at in this graph. You can kind of plot it out. Then, in number 9, I want you to explain why, as you'll see, you're going to get 2 different answers for 7 and 8. And I want you to think about the distribution of scores. I'm going to go ahead and delete this number of students. That just appeared because I actually changed it in Excel, so it made it happen there as well. All right, guys, so that gives you a very thorough explanation of all the tools that you'll need to use in Excel to get the values for your data set and how to create an APA-style table using Microsoft Word.